Give me 1 hour, and I'll give you your courage back. If fear didn't run your life, what would you do this week? Make the call? Launch the project? Tell the truth you've swallowed for years? Fear rarely shouts. It whispers, "Wait, not yet. Be realistic." That voice has stolen more dreams than failure ever did. This audiobook is how you take that voice off the throne. In the next chapters, you'll learn how fear hides as doubt and common sense, how to move even while trembling, how to reprogram your mind so your default is action, not hesitation, how to turn the energy of fear into momentum, how to break the grip of money anxiety, and how to install unshakable faith as your operating system. This is a step-by-step, click-by-click masterclass for your inner world. Practical, direct, and inspired by Napoleon Hill's timeless principles brought into real, everyday decisions. This is for you if you're starting from zero and feel paralyzed by what-ifs. It's for you if you've done the work, read the books, and still get ambushed by doubt right at the edge of opportunity. It's for you if your voice has been too quiet, your light too dim, or your dreams delayed by the illusion of the perfect time. You don't need more time, more talent, or a perfect plan. You need a method. Press play, keep a pen nearby, and promise yourself one thing. When fear speaks in these next minutes, you will not pause this audio. You will move. By the end, you'll have a simple daily practice to make courage a habit and faith your reflex. Ready? Volume up. Breathe in. We begin right now. Chapter 1. Fear. The Invisible Master. Imagine this. Every decision you have ever made, every dream you postponed, every risk you avoided, every word you silenced, was not entirely your own. You believed you were in control, but in truth, there was an unseen hand guiding you, a quiet force whispering in the background, pulling strings without leaving a trace. That force is fear. Fear is not loud. It rarely shouts its name. It does not storm into your life with banners raised, declaring itself your master. Its genius lies in invisibility. Fear wears the masks of caution, prudence, and maturity. It presents itself as common sense, disguising obedience as wisdom. It tells you that the safest choice is the smartest one, that waiting is a virtue, that shrinking is a responsibility. And because its whispers sound reasonable, you obey. But obedience has a price. For every dream you left unfinished, fear collected its payment. For every truth you swallowed, fear claimed a victory. For every opportunity you left untaken, fear wrote another line in your story. And the cruelest part of all is that you did not even notice. You thought you were being wise, patient, or humble. You thought you were making choices, but in reality, you were following orders from an invisible master. The first step toward freedom is recognition. No one overcomes what they refuse to see. Fear does not appear in your life saying, "I am here to stop you from living fully." Instead, it whispers softly, "It's not the right time. Wait a little longer. What if you fail?" And so you wait, you delay, you stay quiet. And in the silence of your hesitation, fear tightens its grip. Think about your own life. When was the last time you longed to speak a truth but kept silent? When was the last time you felt ready to leap but held back? When was the last time you dreamed of something greater but convinced yourself it was impossible? Those choices did not belong to your courage. They belonged to your fear. This is fear's great trick. It convinces you that shrinking is safety. It tells you not to start the business, not to risk the move, not to love too deeply, not to stand too tall. It says, play small and you will be protected. But what fear calls protection is actually confinement. And confinement, repeated long enough, becomes identity. You forget who you are without it. For years, I mistook my obedience to fear as wisdom. I thought I was cautious, responsible, and grounded. In truth, I was paralyzed. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, when, in reality, I was letting moments pass me by. I thought I was humble when I refused to shine, but really, I was afraid of my own light. I believed I was protecting myself, but I was only protecting my chains. The turning point came when I finally admitted the truth. If I continued to obey fear, my entire life would belong to it. Every page of my story would be written by something that was not me, and I had not been born to be a servant of fear. That realization did not erase the trembling in my chest, but it gave me a new kind of vision. I stopped trying to destroy fear and began to study it. I observed it like a scientist examines a virus. I noticed that fear always appeared at the same moments, when I was about to grow, when I was about to risk, when I was about to tell the truth. At first, I thought this was proof I was unprepared. But then I discovered something extraordinary. Fear is not a sign that you are in danger. Fear is a sign that you are alive, standing at the threshold of expansion. The trembling is not there to stop you. It is there to tell you this matters. The knot in your stomach, the pressure in your chest, the hesitation in your voice, these are not proof that you should retreat. They are signals that you are standing on sacred ground, that something valuable waits on the other side. Fear does not show up when you are stagnant. It shows up when you are about to grow. Once I saw this, I began to treat fear as a compass. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" I began asking, "What truth is this pointing to?" If something both scared me and expanded me, it became the path I knew I must take. That shift changed everything. I stopped waiting for fear to disappear before acting. I started writing even when my hands shook. I started speaking even when my voice trembled. I started stepping forward even when my knees felt weak. And with each act, I discovered something liberating. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the refusal to obey it. So here is the first truth of this journey. Fear is the invisible master of your life, but only because you have allowed it to be. The moment you recognize its disguises, you begin to strip it of authority. The moment you move in spite of it, you reclaim your power. Fear will whisper again tomorrow. It will try to slow you down. But now you will know its voice, and knowing its voice is the beginning of freedom. Every fear you face is not a wall but a door, and doors are meant to be opened. Chapter 2. Unmasking Fear's Camouflage. Fear rarely introduces itself honestly. It does not announce, "I am here to keep you small." If it did, you would resist. You would rise against it and push forward anyway. Fear knows this, and so it has mastered the art of disguise. It comes dressed as logic, as prudence, as strategy. It cloaks itself in language so polished that you mistake it for wisdom. That is why so many lives are governed by fear without ever realizing it. The most elegant mask fear wears is doubt. Doubt is convincing because it speaks the language of reason. It whispers, "You're not ready yet. You need more time. You should prepare a little longer," and because it sounds intelligent, you nod your head and agree. But what has really happened? You have postponed action. You have stayed still. You have remained safe, but small. Fear has won, not by shouting, but by suggesting. I lived this pattern for years. Whenever I longed to step into something new, fear disguised itself as responsibility. When I wanted to follow a dream, it told me, "Be practical." When I wanted to speak my truth, it whispered, "It's better to keep quiet." When I wanted to shine, it disguised itself as humility, saying, "Don't make others uncomfortable." And I believed it. I believed I was wise, patient, and humble. But the truth was, I was paralyzed. That is the cost of fear's camouflage. It doesn't simply stop you from acting. It convinces you that your hesitation is noble. It flatters your intellect by calling your paralysis maturity. It strokes your ego by making your silence seem virtuous. And with every postponement, with every delay, with every not yet, fear builds another wall around your destiny. But the walls are invisible, which makes them harder to resist. You don't see the chains because they don't look like chains. They look like common sense. They look like responsibility. They look like self-control. And so you obey them, all the while believing you are choosing freely. It took me a long time to recognize this trap. I thought I feared failure. But when I looked closer, I realized I also feared success. That fear is even quieter, even harder to detect. When you fear failure, you worry about falling short, about being judged, about losing face. But the fear of success whispers a different story. It says, what if you actually rise? What if you shine so brightly that people expect more of you? What if your life changes so much that you can never go back to hiding? This fear convinces you that achieving your dreams would bring isolation, envy, and unbearable responsibility. And so, just when you're about to rise, you sabotage yourself. That was my truth. I delayed projects not because I thought they would fail, but because I feared what would happen if they worked. Success meant responsibility. Success meant visibility. Success meant stepping out of the safety of excuses. I told myself I wasn't ready, but the truth was, I was afraid of becoming who I really was. Maybe you have felt this too. Maybe deep down you know you are capable of more, but the idea of actually living as your full self feels overwhelming. What if people don't accept you? What if you outgrow the circle that has always made you feel safe? What if standing tall means standing alone? That is the fear of success, and it has stopped as many lives as the fear of failure. Together, these two fears form a prison without bars. The fear of failure tells you not to begin. The fear of success tells you not to finish. One whispers, "Don't take the leap. You might fall." The other whispers, "Don't fly too high. You might burn." And between them, you remain suspended, waiting endlessly, moving in circles, never daring fully to live. The only way to break this prison is to unmask fear, to see through its disguises, to call doubt by its true name, to recognize hesitation as the tool of fear rather than the voice of wisdom. When you do this, something shifts inside you. The mask falls away, and you see fear for what it has always been, a liar dressed as a friend. I learned to ask myself one question whenever doubt appeared. Is this thought loyal to my expansion, or is it loyal to my fear? If the thought only kept me small, then I knew it was not wisdom. It was fear in costume. That recognition alone stripped half its power. The other half disappeared the moment I acted anyway. That is the great paradox. Fear may whisper for a lifetime, but the moment you act in spite of it, it dissolves. The moment you speak, even while trembling, the moment you take the step, even while doubting, the moment you move, even while shaking, fear cannot hold you anymore. Unmasking fear does not mean fear vanishes forever. It will still try to disguise itself. It will still whisper in polished language. But once you know its voice, you can no longer be fooled. And every time you refuse to obey, you strengthen your loyalty not to fear, but to your soul. So here is the truth you must remember. When doubt appears, it does not mean you should stop. It means you are standing on sacred ground. Doubt is not a wall. It is a threshold. And thresholds are not places to retreat. They are places to step through. Fear is clever, but you are wiser. It can disguise itself, but you can see through the mask. And once you do, you will discover that fear was never your protector, never your wisdom, never your truth. It was only a costume designed to keep you from expansion. Now you know better, and now you are free to walk through every disguise into the life waiting for you beyond. Chapter 3. From Paralysis to Movement. Fear's most devastating weapon is not its roar, but its silence. It does not always come to push you backward. More often, it simply convinces you to remain still. You think you are safe because you have not moved, because you have not risked, because you have not leapt. But in that stillness, fear claims its greatest victories. It wins not by defeating you outright, but by persuading you to do nothing at all. Paralysis does not feel like defeat. It feels like waiting. You tell yourself you are being prudent, that you are gathering strength, that you are waiting for the perfect moment. But the perfect moment never comes, and days stretch into years, and your dreams remain suspended in someday. Fear thrives in that illusion of waiting. It doesn't need you to fail spectacularly, it only needs you to hesitate endlessly. The truth is that fear does not die in the mind. You cannot outthink it. You cannot argue with it until it dissolves. In fact, the more you think, the louder it becomes. Sit still long enough, and fear will multiply. It will conjure every possible outcome, every imagined disaster, every humiliation that could follow your choice. The more you analyze, the more impossible everything feels. But something extraordinary happens the moment you move. Even if you act clumsily, even if you take the smallest step, fear begins to dissolve. Because fear cannot survive in the presence of movement, it only has power in stillness. Action is fear's undoing. I remember times when I was paralyzed by indecision. I sat at my desk, drowning in what-ifs. My mind became a courtroom where every possibility was put on trial, every desire cross-examined, every dream sentenced to postponement. I told myself I was being wise, but the truth was, I was afraid. And then, one day, in a moment of exhaustion more than courage, I simply moved. I made the call. I wrote the first sentence. I spoke the truth. My hands trembled, my voice cracked, my knees shook. But I acted. And in that instant, the fear that had seemed unbearable for days evaporated. Nothing magical happened in the world outside. What changed was inside. Fear lost its throne because I refused to kneel to it any longer. That is how fear works. It is a parasite that feeds on hesitation. The longer you delay, the stronger it grows. But the moment you move, its grip weakens. Every courageous act, no matter how small, becomes a declaration of freedom. Every word spoken in truth, every risk taken despite trembling, every step made while doubting chips away at the illusion that fear has power over you. This is why momentum is such a force. At first, movement feels impossible. Fear is heavy, pressing against your chest like a stone. You summon everything inside you just to push it an inch. But once you do, once you begin, momentum takes over. The weight that once pinned you down begins to roll with you. Suddenly the impossible feels lighter, the overwhelming feels manageable, and what seemed like an unscalable wall reveals itself as a door you had only to touch. Paralysis is cruel because it teaches you to distrust yourself. Every time you delay, every time you choose not to act, you reinforce the belief that you are not ready, not capable, not enough. And the more you rehearse that belief, the more it feels like identity. You stop saying, "I feel afraid," and you start saying, "That's just who I am." But it is not who you are. It is what fear has trained you to be. I once thought bravery meant waiting until fear disappeared. I believed that one day I would wake up fearless, and then I would finally act. But that day never came. What I learned is that courage does not arrive before action. It is born in action. You do not act because you are fearless. You act, and then you discover courage waiting for you on the other side. There is a paradox hidden in fear's presence. It does not appear when you are stagnant, resigned, or defeated. Fear appears when you are about to grow. It rises when you are standing at the threshold of expansion. That trembling in your chest, that hesitation in your mind, that knot in your stomach, they are not signs that you should retreat. They are signs that you are close to something meaningful. Fear often arrives as the guardian of your next chapter. What you interpret as a warning is often a signal. The body knows this, even when the mind resists. Fear floods your system with energy because you are about to do something significant. You can interpret that energy as paralysis, or you can transmute it into movement. The choice is yours. When I began to see fear this way, everything shifted. I stopped asking, how do I get rid of fear? Instead, I asked, what is this fear pointing me toward? And almost always, the answer was the very thing I had been avoiding. The conversation I needed to have, the leap I needed to take, the truth I needed to speak. Fear was not there to block me. It was there to show me where my soul wanted to go. The only cure for paralysis is movement. Not someday, not later, now. Even the smallest action breaks the spell. Write one sentence, make one call, speak one line of truth. Move an inch, and you will see fear shrink before your eyes. Do not wait for courage to appear first. Courage is born the moment you act. I eventually learned to thank fear, because in its own misguided way, it was trying to protect me. It thought staying small was safer than risking. It thought silence was safer than truth. It thought hiding was safer than shining. But I realized I no longer wanted safety at the price of my soul, so instead of fighting fear, I acknowledged it. I said, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but I do not need protection anymore. I need freedom," and then I moved. This is what you must understand. Fear will always whisper. It will always try to persuade you to wait. But you are not here to wait. You are here to live. And living requires movement. Tremble and move. Doubt and move. Hesitate and move. Because every step forward is not just progress, it is a declaration of identity. With each act, you become the kind of person who no longer bows to the invisible master. Fear is loudest in stillness, but in motion, its voice fades. So keep moving even if the step is small, even if your hands shake, even if your heart pounds. Move and watch as the chains of paralysis begin to fall away. For movement is not just the way to overcome fear, it is the way to remember who you truly are. Chapter 4. The Religion of Fear. There is a fear more insidious than trembling before a leap or hesitating before a risk. It is not the fear that makes your hands sweat before a speech or keeps you awake at night before a difficult choice. This fear is older, deeper, and far more disguised. It is fear that has been sanctified, fear that has been carved into belief systems and handed down through generations, not as weakness, but as virtue. It is the fear that has been worshipped, preached, and enforced. It is the religion of fear. Unlike ordinary fear, which you can sometimes see for what it is, this form of fear rarely announces itself. It does not whisper, "Be careful," or "Don't risk it." Instead, it wraps itself in the voice of morality, of duty, of divine authority. It tells you that suffering is holiness, that silence is humility, that guilt is proof of goodness, and because it wears the mask of righteousness, you obey it without question. You bow to it, believing you are bowing to God. I remember the weight of this fear pressing into me as a child. I grew up believing that God was watching my every move, not as a loving presence, but as a harsh judge with a list of my failures. Every desire felt suspicious. Every joy came with the dread that punishment would follow. If something went right, I braced myself for the price I would have to pay. If I felt happy, guilt quickly followed, whispering that joy was dangerous. I believed I was being faithful, but I was only being afraid. I believed my guilt was evidence of virtue, but it was really chains around my soul. I thought humility meant hiding my gifts, when in truth I was burying them under the weight of fear, and like so many, I mistook my slavery for spirituality. The religion of fear does not start with you. It is inherited. It comes from parents who warn you not to stand out, from teachers who punish for asking questions, from communities that value obedience above authenticity, from traditions that glorify suffering as the highest proof of devotion, and little by little, these lessons seep into your bones. You stop seeing them as instructions and begin to see them as truth. You no longer question them because questioning feels like betrayal. Generations have lived under this yoke. Entire families, entire cultures have been trained to distrust joy, to shrink their desires, to bow their heads not out of reverence but out of fear. And the tragedy is not only that people live this way, but that they defend it. They pass it down. They become guardians of chains, telling their children that freedom is rebellion and guilt is godliness. This is how fear becomes doctrine, carved not on stone tablets, but on human hearts. Yet the soul is stubborn. It can be silenced for a while, but it cannot be extinguished. Sooner or later, it begins to scream. It asks questions that no preacher of fear can answer. Why do I feel guilty for being alive? Why do I feel smaller when I was made to be vast? Why do I believe that honoring God means dishonoring myself? These questions are not rebellion. They are the soul trying to breathe again. The day those questions rise in you is the day true spirituality begins. Because true spirituality is not about shrinking, it is about awakening. It is not about guilt, it is about freedom. It is not about silence, it is about truth. The voice of fear tells you to kneel because you are unworthy. The voice of love tells you to rise because you are already whole. Breaking free from the religion of fear feels dangerous. At first, it feels like betrayal. You think you are betraying your faith, your family, your tradition, even God. But the real betrayal is living your entire life small, guilty, and chained while pretending it is holiness. The true betrayal is bowing to fear while calling it devotion. I had to reach a breaking point. I had to look at myself in the mirror and admit that what I was worshipping was not God, not love, not truth. It was fear wearing a halo. I had to tell myself, God is not waiting to punish me for living. God is waiting for me to trust that I am already alive in Him. That realization did not erase my trembling, but it shattered the lie. I stopped asking permission to exist. I stopped hiding my gifts in the name of humility. I stopped confusing chains with devotion. The shift was painful. It cost me relationships. It made me an outcast to those who still worshipped fear. But it gave me something greater: peace. Not the peace of avoiding punishment, but the peace of finally being aligned with my truth. Perhaps the most dangerous part of the religion of fear is that it does not stop with you. It turns you into an agent of fear for others. When you believe suffering is holy, you judge those who live freely. When you believe silence is virtue, you condemn those who speak boldly. When you believe guilt is goodness, you shame those who love differently, dream differently, or follow another path. And in this way, fear not only imprisons you, it makes you a jailer. But the soul knows the difference. The soul does not thrive in guilt, it thrives in love. The soul does not expand in silence, it expands in expression. The soul does not wither in joy, it blooms. And if you are quiet long enough to listen, you will hear it. The gentle voice inside does not demand fear. It calls you to authenticity. It calls you to freedom. Ask yourself now, does my faith make me feel small, or does it make me feel vast? Does it fill me with guilt, or does it ground me in peace? Does it invite me to trust, or does it command me to doubt myself? The answers will tell you whether your beliefs are born of love or of fear. Because here is the truth. God does not demand your chains. The divine does not thrive on your silence. The sacred is not honored by your guilt. What honors the source of your being is authenticity. What honors God is courage. What honors the divine is living fully the gift of life you were given. The religion of fear is powerful only until you see it for what it is. Once you unmask it, its hold weakens. Once you dare to question, the walls begin to crumble. And once you taste freedom, you cannot return to worshipping chains. Fear will always try to disguise itself as virtue, but you are wiser now. You know that love expands while fear contracts. You know that truth liberates while fear enslaves. You know that the voice that calls you guilty is not the voice of God, but the echo of generations of control. And the moment you stop obeying that voice, you begin to hear another, a quieter, deeper, more ancient voice, the voice of your own soul, whispering, "You were never meant to live afraid. You were meant to live free." Chapter 5. The Fear of Failure and the Fear of Success. Most people believe fear only moves in one direction. They think it is always about falling short, about stumbling, about losing face. They point to the fear of failure as the great enemy of progress, the invisible wall that holds dreams hostage. And yes, failure is a giant shadow cast across the human spirit. But hidden within that shadow, almost unnoticed, is another fear. Quieter, more cunning, and often far more paralyzing. It is the fear of success. Together, these two forces form a prison without walls. One warns you of the pain of falling. The other warns you of the weight of flying. Between them, countless lives are lived in circles, never daring to begin, never daring to finish. The fear of failure is easy to recognize. It is the voice that tells you not to start the business, not to confess your love, not to step into the spotlight. It paints terrifying pictures of humiliation. It whispers that if you try and fall short, everyone will see you for who you truly are. Inadequate, unworthy, exposed. This fear thrives on the illusion that mistakes define you. That one wrong step erases your entire worth, and so you obey it, not because you want to, but because the imagined shame feels unbearable. But here is the truth. Failure is not a verdict. Failure is an event. It is feedback. It is the universe showing you how to refine, how to adjust, how to grow. You do not become a failure when you fall. You become a failure when you decide not to rise again. The stories of every master, every creator, every leader are filled with what the world calls failures. Yet those very stumbles became the stepping stones of greatness. The only thing that separates those who rise from those who remain invisible is the decision to keep moving. And yet, even when you dismantle the fear of failure, another fear emerges, more subtle and far less discussed. The fear of success. At first, it doesn't look like fear at all. It appears as hesitation, as humility, as caution. But at its root, it is the terror of what might happen if you actually succeed. You imagine yourself stepping into your power, your voice, your destiny, and instead of joy, you feel anxiety. Success means responsibility. Success means visibility. Success means you can no longer hide behind excuses. It means you must live awake. And for many, that is more terrifying than falling ever could be. I remember the first time I saw this fear in myself. I thought I was afraid of rejection, afraid that people would laugh at me. But when I looked deeper, I realized I was just as afraid that they would listen, that my words would carry weight, that my work would demand more of me than I thought I could give. It was easier to tell myself I wasn't ready than to admit I was afraid of becoming who I truly was. It was easier to delay than to risk the transformation that success would demand. Perhaps you have felt it too. The moment you begin to rise, you hear a whisper inside. What if I can't sustain it? What if people envy me? What if I outgrow the ones I love? What if standing tall means standing alone? And so you sabotage yourself, not because you cannot succeed, but because success feels like too much to hold. This is the quiet sabotage of greatness. The prison is complete when both fears coexist. The fear of failure tells you not to start. The fear of success tells you not to finish, and so you live suspended in hesitation, trapped in endless preparation, forever almost ready. Life becomes a loop of half-lived attempts, safe but suffocating. How do you break free? The first step is to see failure and success for what they are. Failure is not your identity. It is feedback. Success is not a threat. It is alignment. When you fall, you learn. When you rise, you embody. Neither state defines you. Both are experiences on the path of becoming. You are not the result. You are the one who moves through results. The deeper step is loyalty. Every time you obey fear, whether it is fear of falling or fear of flying, you betray yourself. You shrink from your truth, not because you are incapable, but because you have chosen safety over destiny. The turning point comes when you decide, I will no longer betray myself in the name of comfort. I will no longer bow to shadows, whether they threaten me with failure or success. I will be loyal to my soul. I discovered that the cure for the fear of failure is imperfect action. You act, you stumble, you learn, you move forward. Each mistake loses its teeth the moment you see it as a teacher, and the cure for the fear of success is identity. You root yourself so deeply in who you are that no achievement can inflate you and no spotlight can distort you. When your sense of self is anchored in truth, success becomes expression, not a burden. The first time I began to speak my truth without softening it, the reactions were not all kind. Some turned away. Some felt betrayed. Some could not accept the new version of me. But for the first time, I felt whole. I realized peace is not found in pleasing everyone. Peace is found in honoring yourself. And when you stop fearing rejection or success, you gain something greater than either, freedom. So here is the uncomfortable truth. You may fail. You may succeed. Both carry challenges. Both carry lessons. But the only unforgivable outcome is to do nothing, to let your life be dictated by fears dressed in different masks, because in the end, the greatest tragedy is not falling short, nor even outgrowing others. It is never daring at all. To live fully, you must face both fears. You must tell failure, you are not my end. You must tell success, you are not my enemy. And then you must move, loyal only to the voice within that has waited far too long to be heard. Chapter 6. The fear of being yourself. There is a fear so subtle, so intimate, that most people never name it. It hides beneath the surface of daily life, quieter than the fear of failure, less obvious than the fear of rejection, and more delicate than the fear of success. It is the fear that shapes how you speak, how you walk, how you present yourself to the world. It is the fear of being yourself. This fear is not about stumbling in front of others. It is about daring to stand in your truth without disguises, without masks, without the careful editing of your personality. It is the fear of letting the world see you unfiltered, with your raw ideas, your vulnerable emotions, your different beliefs, your strange and beautiful edges. It is the fear that if you show who you truly are, people will turn away. From childhood, we are trained to hide parts of ourselves. The loud child learns to stay quiet. The dreamer learns not to share too much. The one who loves differently learns to keep it secret. Slowly, we trade authenticity for acceptance. And little by little, we forget where the mask ends and the face begins. I wore that mask for years. I became so skilled at playing the part others expected that I forgot what it meant to simply be me. I smiled when I wanted to cry. I stayed silent when my truth was burning. I lowered my head when I longed to rise. And the world applauded me for it. They called me polite, humble, and agreeable. But inside, I knew I was not alive. I was tolerated, not loved. I was accepted, but not seen. That is the deepest wound of this fear. You might gain acceptance, but it is acceptance for a version of you that does not exist. And when you are loved for a mask, the love never reaches your soul. It bounces off the disguise, leaving the real you starving in the dark. The prison of acceptance is heavy because it convinces you that shrinking is loyalty. You tell yourself you are protecting others by hiding your truth. You say you don't want to offend, you don't want to outshine, you don't want to lose your place among those you love, but in truth, what you are protecting is fear. You betray your own soul in order not to disturb others. You live in half light so no one else feels too dim beside you. Pretending is exhausting. Every mask is a weight. Every edited word is a cut against your spirit. And the longer you pretend, the more the mask begins to fuse with your skin. One day, you look in the mirror and wonder who you really are, or whether the real you even exists anymore. The fear of being yourself is powerful because it does not just threaten rejection, it threatens loss. Loss of the character you created to survive, loss of the roles you played to be accepted, loss of the relationships built not on truth, but on pretense. To remove the mask is to risk losing everything that was built on it. And that can feel like death. But what is the cost of never removing it? You may be applauded, but you will never feel peace. You may be surrounded, but you will always feel alone. You may be accepted, but you will never feel loved. Because deep down, you will know the truth. No one has met the real you. I remember the day I could no longer bear the weight. I was sitting across from someone I loved, and the words were burning in me. For years, I had hidden parts of myself, softened my truths, dimmed my light so they would not feel threatened. But that day, the mask cracked. I said, "This is who I am. This is what I believe. I know it is not what you expected, but I can't keep pretending." The silence that followed was terrifying. They looked at me as if I had betrayed something sacred, and maybe I had, the sacred pact of pretending. But in that silence, I also felt something I had not felt in years: freedom. For the first time, I was no longer betraying myself, and even if I lost them, I had regained my soul. This is the paradox. To live authentically, you may lose people. You may lose opportunities. You may lose comfort. But what you gain is priceless. You gain the peace of never betraying yourself again. You gain relationships built on truth, not on masks. You gain opportunities aligned with who you are, not who you pretended to be. And above all, you gain freedom. Being yourself is not just an act of courage, it is an act of respect. Respect for your soul, for your story, for the voice that whispers in the night when all the world is quiet. That voice is asking you to stop conspiring to be loved, to stop bargaining with your identity, to stop betraying your essence for approval. Of course, authenticity is not comfortable. It demands brutal honesty. It asks you to look at the places where you've hidden, at the age when you first decided it was safer to act than to be. It asks if you are willing to retrieve those buried parts of yourself, even if it means rebuilding your life from scratch. But this reconstruction is no longer a duty. It is choice. It is born not from fear, but from dignity. I have learned that when you finally live without masks, something extraordinary happens. You give permission to others to do the same. When you dare to be raw, you invite others to stop performing. When you shine without apology, you remind others that they can shine too. Your authenticity becomes a torch in a world of shadows. So, ask yourself, how much longer will you pretend? How many decades will you trade for the comfort of being tolerated? How many nights will you betray yourself for the illusion of belonging? Life is waiting, not for the character you built, not for the edited version of you, but for the raw, unpolished, true you. You may cry. You may lose. You may feel naked in the face of judgment. But what hurts more than rejection is self-betrayal. What burns longer than shame is the silence of your inner voice when you ignore it. And what heals deepest is the moment you decide that being yourself is worth more than being accepted. The fear of being yourself will not vanish overnight. It will whisper every time you risk showing your truth. But with every act of honesty, the whisper grows weaker. With every risk, the mask loosens. With every truth spoken, you reclaim another piece of your soul. And one day, you will wake up and realize that the person you present to the world and the person you are inside are no longer two different beings. They have become one, and that is freedom. Chapter 7. Reprogramming the Mind. Fear feels permanent when you are inside it. It feels like part of your personality, like something sewn into your DNA. You begin to believe, this is just who I am. I'm cautious. I'm doubtful. I'm not the kind of person who takes risks. But the truth is far different. Fear is not your identity. It is a program. And what has been programmed can be reprogrammed. From the moment you were born, your mind was like an open field. Every voice, every warning, every repetition planted seeds. Parents told you to be careful. Teachers told you not to speak too loudly. Friends told you not to dream too big. And little by little, those warnings became your operating system. With enough repetition, those ideas stopped feeling like advice and started feeling like truth. Now, years later, when you hesitate before speaking or shrink before shining, you believe it is instinct. In reality, it is programming. Think about it. As a child, you were not born afraid of your own potential. You were curious, daring, reckless even. You touched what you weren't supposed to touch. You spoke without fear of judgment. You dreamed without limits. Fear was not in you. It was taught to you. And if it was taught, it can be untaught. If it was learned, it can be unlearned. The mind works on repetition. Whatever it hears most, it obeys. That is why fearful thoughts feel so natural, because they have been repeated thousands of times. You heard, "Be careful," more than you heard, "Be brave." You heard, "Don't try," more than you heard, "Go for it." And without realizing it, those echoes became your inner voice. I once believed every thought in my head was mine, but then I began to listen closely, and I realized most of them were borrowed. They belonged to teachers, parents, critics, cultures, even strangers whose doubts I had absorbed. I had been living a script written by others. The shocking part was that I didn't even know it. The first step in reprogramming the mind is awareness. You must become a witness to your own thoughts. I began to write mine down. When I caught myself thinking, I can't do this, I wrote it. When I heard, this isn't for me, I wrote it. And when I looked at the words on paper, I realized how absurd they sounded. They were not the voice of truth. They were the voice of fear that had been rehearsed so long it felt natural. At first, I tried to fight those thoughts. I shouted over them. I told myself to stop thinking negatively. But that only made them louder. You cannot silence a program by resisting it. You replace it by installing something new. And so, I began to practice a simple discipline. Every time I caught myself repeating a fear-based thought, I consciously chose a different one. When I thought, I can't, I answered, I'm learning. When I thought, I'll fail, I answered, I'm growing. When I thought, I'm not enough, I answered, I am becoming more every day. At first it felt false. My mind argued, this isn't true. You don't believe this, and I almost gave up. But then I remembered. Fear had also felt false once. The first time I was told not to speak, not to risk, not to shine, it felt strange. But I repeated it enough times that it became natural. That is how all programming works. So I kept going. I repeated courage until it began to feel natural too. This is the essence of reprogramming. The mind cannot tell the difference between truth and repetition. Whatever you repeat with intensity, you accept as reality. That is why people who repeat fear live in fear, and those who repeat courage grow into courage. The code you run most often becomes your operating system. Reprogramming is not only about words, it is about the environment. For years, I surrounded myself with voices that reinforced fear, people who doubted, who complained, who settled, and I wondered why I could not rise. The truth is simple. Fear is contagious. If you live in an atmosphere of smallness, your own courage suffocates. So I began to change my environment. I read words that expanded me. I listened to teachers who spoke of faith. I sought out conversations with people who lived boldly. At first, it was uncomfortable. Their confidence felt foreign. But slowly, their voices replaced the old ones. My environment became my new classroom, and my courage became the subject. Reprogramming does not happen overnight. It is a discipline, a daily practice. It is like stretching a muscle that has been tight for years. At first, it hurts. You feel resistance. You want to go back to what feels familiar, but the longer you practice, the more natural it becomes. Courage, like fear, is a habit, and habits are built one repetition at a time. There were mornings when I woke up with the old voice still whispering, "Stay small, don't risk it." In those moments, I did something simple. I asked myself, what would someone who is not ruled by fear do today? Then I did it, even if it was small, even if it was clumsy, even if it scared me. Some days it was making a call I had avoided. Some days it was speaking my truth in a conversation. Some days it was saying yes to an opportunity instead of hiding behind excuses. With every small act, the programming shifted. The old code weakened, the new code strengthened. And over time I realized something profound. Fear was not my essence. It was a habit, and habits can change. I want you to understand this. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes them. Thoughts are just programs, many of them borrowed, most of them unexamined. And from that place of awareness, you can choose. You can decide which thoughts to repeat, which voices to amplify, which truths to embody. There will always be moments when fear tries to reinstall itself. You will hear the old voices whisper again, but by then you will know the difference. You will recognize that not every thought deserves obedience. And with practice, you will no longer default to fear, you will default to freedom. The greatest power you have is not to control the world outside, but to choose the programming inside. Because once you change the code in your mind, everything else follows. Your words shift, your actions shift, your relationships shift, your reality shifts. Reprogramming the mind is not about pretending fear doesn't exist. It is about refusing to let fear have the final word. It is about training your mind to obey your truth instead of your conditioning. And when that shift becomes natural, when your inner voice speaks with faith more often than with fear, you realize something extraordinary. Freedom is not a gift from the outside. It is a discipline of the inside. You were not born to repeat fear. You were born to create. And the moment you reclaim your authority over your thoughts, you begin to live not as the product of programming, but as the programmer of your destiny. Chapter 8. Transmuting Fear into Energy. For most of my life, I believed fear was an enemy to be destroyed. I thought the goal was to erase it, to silence it, to conquer it until it disappeared forever. But no matter how hard I fought, fear always returned. Sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, but always there. And the more I resisted it, the stronger it seemed to become. That was when I discovered a truth that changed everything. Fear is not meant to be destroyed. Fear is energy, and energy is not eliminated, it is transformed. Fear is more than just a mental emotion. You have it in your body. Your tense chest, knotted stomach, and shaking hands are all signs of raw, unformed energy that is just waiting for guidance. Fear is not nothing. It is a movement that is locked within you and demands to be released. Trying to bury it is our error. Pushing it down causes it to fester. When you ignore it, it takes on the forms of fatigue, rage, or anxiety. Fear that is suppressed changes rather than dies. The path of freedom is not suppression, but transmutation. Instead of asking, "How do I kill my fear?" you must ask, "How do I use it?" Fear is not here to paralyze you. It is here to give you power if you are willing to shift its form. I learned this in one of the darkest nights of my life. Everything seemed to collapse at once. Relationships breaking, projects failing, faith slipping through my fingers. I lay awake, suffocated by thoughts telling me I was finished. My body was heavy, my chest burned, my mind screamed with scenarios of disaster. For years I would have tried to silence those feelings. This time I did something different. I stopped resisting. I sat in the center of it and whispered to myself, "This is energy. It is not here to kill me. It is here to move me." So I let it move. I breathed deeper than I ever had. I wrote until my hands ached. I walked hard into the night, my steps pounding against the earth. I shouted words I had swallowed for years. I let my tears fall without shame. And as I did, the weight inside me shifted. What had been pressure became fuel. What had been suffocation became release. By the end of that night, nothing around me had changed, but everything inside me had. I was no longer paralyzed. I was alive again. That was the lesson. Fear is fire. If you resist it, it burns you. If you bury it, it smolders and consumes you from within. But if you channel it, if you give it air and direction, it becomes the flame that lights your way. Fear often appears at the edge of growth. Notice this in your own life. It is not when you are stagnant that fear rises. It is when you are about to leap. When you're about to speak truth, to risk love, to step into your purpose, fear floods your body. That trembling is not proof that you are in danger. It is proof that you are standing at the threshold of expansion. Fear is the body's way of saying something significant is about to happen. What if you stopped treating that trembling as a stop sign and started treating it as a signal? What if every time fear surged through you, you whispered, "This is energy. This is fuel. This is proof that I am alive and that I am stepping into something that matters." That single shift turns fear from an enemy into a compass. It took me years to understand that fear and desire come from the same well. They are twins born of the same source of energy inside you. You are not afraid of failure. You desire success. You are not afraid of speaking. You desire to be heard. You are not afraid of love. You desire connection. Every fear points to a hidden desire. Fear contracts, desire expands, but both are expressions of the same energy. If you can touch the desire behind the fear, you can redirect the energy. When I stood trembling before speaking in public, I used to think, I am terrified of being judged. But when I looked deeper, I realized the truth. I desire to be understood. That desire gave me courage. The fear didn't vanish, but it shifted. It became a current I could ride instead of a wall I had to fight. Transmutation is not a mystical trick. It is emotional alchemy. It is taking the raw material of fear and converting it into fuel for creation. You feel the knot in your stomach, and instead of calling it weakness, you call it power waiting to be expressed. You feel the trembling in your hands, and instead of hiding them, you use them to write, to build, to touch. You feel the pressure in your chest, and instead of suffocating, you breathe deeper, let it flow, and act anyway. The body knows how to move energy. Dance, walk, breathe, cry, speak, sing. These are not just actions, they are channels. When you move, you give fear an outlet, and it transforms. This is why courage always feels alive, why action brings relief. Because the energy that once felt like a prison is now moving like a river. At first, this practice feels uncomfortable. Fear is raw. Transmuting it into power feels unnatural. You will want to resist. But with each repetition, the process becomes easier. Eventually, fear rises, and instead of freezing, you say, "Good. Here is the energy I need," and you act. The greatest misunderstanding about courage is that it is the absence of fear. It is not. Courage is what happens when fear has been transmuted. It is not that the trembling disappears. It is that you learn how to use the trembling as fuel. This is why the bravest people often look calm. It is not because they feel nothing. It is because they have learned to harness everything. They don't waste energy fighting fear. They ride it. They turn it into motion, into vision, into creation. Fear will visit you again. It will whisper when you are about to risk, about to grow, about to love. Do not push it away. Sit with it. Feel it in your body. Ask it, what are you trying to show me? What desire are you pointing to? And then let the energy move. Write, speak, walk, shout, cry. Do whatever channels it. Then step forward, because once the energy flows, you will realize fear was never there to stop you. It was there to awaken you. You cannot live without fear, but you can live without obeying it. You can live as one who knows how to take the raw current of fear and turn it into the electricity that powers your destiny. That is transmutation. That is freedom. Chapter 9. Financial Fear and Abundance. Among all the fears that dominate human life, perhaps none is as constant, as quietly corrosive, and as deeply rooted as the fear of money, or more precisely, the fear of not having enough. Unlike other fears that flare in moments and then fade, financial fear lingers like a shadow that follows you from morning until night. It whispers when you wake. It gnaws at you when you plan your day. It colors the way you look at opportunities, relationships, even yourself. It is not always loud, but it is always present, like a low hum in the background of your existence. This fear is not really about numbers. Numbers are neutral. A bank balance, a paycheck, a bill. These are only symbols. The true power of financial fear lies in what those numbers seem to say about you. You do not only fear running out of money, you fear what it means if you do. You fear it means you are unworthy, that you are incapable, that you are failing at life itself, and because money touches every area of life, that fear spreads like wildfire. It does not stop at your wallet. It seeps into your identity. For years I lived in that prison. Even when I had enough, I feared losing it. Even when I earned well, I feared it would not last. I lived as if money were not just paper, but oxygen, and every day was a struggle to breathe. I believed I was being practical, being responsible, but what I was really being was afraid. I measured my courage against my account balance. I let opportunities slip because the what-if of loss felt heavier than the possibility of gain. It was then that I discovered something that shocked me. Poverty is not a number, it is a state of mind. And wealth is not a bank balance, it is a way of being. You can have nothing and feel abundant. You can have millions and still feel poor. Because abundance is not measured in digits, it is measured in trust. Scarcity is not the absence of money, it is the presence of fear. I once knew a man who had more than enough to never worry again, yet he lived as though he were on the edge of collapse. He trusted no one. He obsessed over every transaction. He carried the paranoia of losing what he already had. His wealth became his cage. He had money, but he was poor. I also knew a woman with little more than enough to cover her daily needs, yet she radiated joy. She gave generously. She dreamed boldly. She trusted life. She had little money, but she was rich. The difference was not in their accounts. It was in their relationship to fear. Money becomes your master when you confuse it with your identity. You were taught that your value lies in what you produce, in what you earn, in what you can prove. So when money flows, you feel worthy. When money dries up, you feel ashamed. You ride an endless roller coaster of validation and despair, all because you believe a number defines you. But money is not who you are. Money is only energy. Energy that flows, energy that exchanges, energy that expands when moved with trust and contracts when hoarded with fear. The problem is that most of us are taught from childhood to fear money. We are told it is scarce. We are told it is dirty. We are told only greedy people pursue it, that only the lucky obtain it, that only the ruthless hold on to it. And so, unconsciously, we inherit scarcity as part of our programming. We repeat phrases like, "I can't afford this." Money doesn't grow on trees. People like us will never be rich, and every repetition reinforces the chains. Without realizing it, we learn not only to fear losing money, we learn to fear having it. When I finally began to examine these beliefs, I realized I'd been sabotaging myself for years. I turned down opportunities not because they weren't right for me, but because they scared me. I avoided investing in myself, telling myself I was being practical, when in truth I was obeying fear. I stayed small because small felt safe, even though it was suffocating. The turning point came when I asked myself a different question. What if money were not a threat but an ally? What if money were not proof of greed but proof of growth? What if money was not something to fear but something to partner with? Slowly, I began to treat money as a friend, not a judge. I moved it with intention, not with panic. I invested in experiences and learning, not from desperation, but from faith. And as I did, the fear began to loosen its grip. Abundance is not about denying reality, it is about redefining it. Scarcity says, there is never enough. Abundance says, I can create more. Scarcity says, if I lose, I'm finished. Abundance says, if I fall, I can rise again. Scarcity chains you to the belief that you are powerless. Abundance reminds you that you are the source. I realized that financial fear was never really about money. It was about forgetting my own power. It was about believing that my destiny was controlled by markets, bosses, or circumstances. But the truth is that I am not dependent on any of those things. My true wealth is not in the economy. It is in me. It is in my capacity to adapt, to create, to rise again and again. So I began a new discipline. Whenever fear told me, don't risk it, you might lose, I asked, and what if I lose? What then? And the answer came, then I will learn. Then I will rebuild. Then I will grow stronger. Suddenly, the fear of loss shrank, because loss could no longer take away who I was. Money could come and go, but I remained. My creativity remained. My courage remained. My soul remained. True abundance is not what sits in your account. True abundance is the conviction that no matter what happens, you can rise. That conviction is worth more than gold, because once you have it, nothing can enslave you again. Financial fear will still whisper. It will tell you to stay small, to avoid risk, to cling tightly. But now you know its voice. And when you hear it, you can thank it for trying to protect you. Then choose differently. You can move money with trust instead of panic. You can pursue opportunities with courage instead of hesitation. You can expand instead of contract. Because money is not your master, it is your servant. And the moment you stop fearing it, it begins to serve you. Chapter 10. Faith as the Antidote. We have traveled through the landscapes of fear. We have seen how it hides in disguises, how it paralyzes with hesitation, how it seeps into identity, how it chains you with guilt, how it manipulates your relationship with money, and how it silences the most authentic parts of your soul. Fear is ancient, subtle, and persistent. But here is the final truth. Fear has only one true antidote. That antidote is faith. Faith is not a vague hope or a blind optimism. It is not the shallow chant of everything will be fine while you tremble inside. Faith is not denial. It is not pretending problems do not exist. Faith is a position of the mind, a choice of the soul, a discipline of daily life. It is the quiet conviction that no matter how uncertain the path looks, there is something greater guiding you. Faith is the refusal to obey fear. Fear thrives on doubt. Doubt is its lifeblood. Doubt whispers, what if you fail? What if you are not enough? What if this is the wrong step? And as long as you demand perfect certainty before moving, you will remain paralyzed forever. Life never offers guarantees. Waiting for everything to be clear before you act is another way of waiting for eternity. Faith is what cuts through that fog. Faith says, I will move not because everything is certain, but because I trust clarity will come as I walk. Faith does not wait for the entire path to be lit. It steps into the next stone, trusting the light will expand with each step. For years, I misunderstood faith. I thought it was something people were born with, a spiritual gift granted to the lucky. I believe some carried faith like a flame in their chest, while others were doomed to stumble in the dark. But then I discovered that faith is not a gift. Faith is a choice. It is a decision renewed daily, sometimes hourly. On nights when I felt crushed, when fear screamed so loudly it drowned everything else, faith was not a feeling. It was a whisper of choice. I will not surrender. I will take one more step. I will trust, even though I do not see. This is how faith is built, not in moments of comfort, but in moments of resistance. Faith is like a muscle, and muscles are not forged in ease. They are forged in struggle. The weight that feels unbearable today becomes the strength of tomorrow. Every obstacle is a weight placed in your hands. Every dark night is a resistance designed to make you stronger. You don't grow faith when everything is clear. You grow faith when nothing is, and you keep moving anyway. Reprogramming the mind with faith is not complicated, but it is demanding. It requires vigilance. If your mind has been trained for years to expect the worst, it will not transform overnight. Fear will keep trying to slip back in, disguised as logic, as responsibility, as caution. That is why faith must become your discipline. You must train your thoughts the way an athlete trains his body. When the voice of fear whispers, "You can't," you answer, "I can, and I will learn how." When doubt says, "You will fail," you answer, "I may stumble, but I will rise." When hesitation says, "It's too late," you answer, "Now is always the right time to begin." At first, this feels mechanical. Your heart won't believe it yet, your body will resist, but repetition builds reality. Just as fear became your habit, faith can become your nature. The mind does not know the difference between truth and repetition. It obeys whatever it hears most. That is why those who rehearse fear live small, and those who rehearse faith live free. But words alone are not enough. Faith must live in action. If you declare faith but remain still, your words decay into fantasy. Faith without movement is not faith, it is a daydream. Real faith breathes only when you act. You must make the call, write the page, step into the unknown. And every time you act, even trembling, your faith grows stronger, your mind grows braver, your identity shifts. This is how I rebuilt myself. I surrounded my life with voices that spoke faith, not fear. I withdrew from those who only repeated tragedy, who only spoke scarcity, who only sowed distrust. I didn't judge them, but I understood. My soul needed a different environment. I fed on books, teachings, and conversations that reminded me of who I could be. And slowly, the cracks in my fear-filled mind began to close, replaced by a deeper ground, an invisible root. Faith is not about ignoring reality, it is about choosing which reality to obey. Fear tells you the worst is coming. Faith tells you that even if the worst comes, you will rise again. Fear tells you that you are not enough. Faith tells you that you were never meant to be enough alone, that something greater moves through you. Fear chains you to the visible. Faith anchors you to the invisible, and the invisible, though unseen, is stronger than anything that can be measured. I will not tell you faith makes life easy. It does not. Storms will still come, loss will still hurt, darkness will still visit. But when you live in faith, you no longer kneel before those storms. You no longer let fear dictate your identity. You move through difficulty with a different posture, with a quiet strength that no shadow can take from you. That is the miracle of faith. It does not erase the challenge, it transforms you within it. The longer you live this way, the more faith becomes not something you practice, but something you are. At first, it is an effort. Then it becomes instinct. Then it becomes identity. One day, you realize you no longer need to convince yourself to trust. You simply do. Because your very being has shifted. You no longer belong to fear. You belong to freedom. This is the final step of the journey. Not to destroy fear, it will always whisper. Not to deny fear, it will always try to disguise itself. But to dethrone fear, to strip it of power, to let faith become the ground beneath your feet. Faith is the antidote, the root, the foundation. It is the unshakable presence within you that fear cannot corrupt. So now you must decide. Will you continue to let fear whisper and obey it as if it were the truth? Or will you take this moment as the beginning of your faith? Not faith as emotion, but faith as identity. Not faith as wish, but faith as discipline. Not faith as fragile hope, but faith as the invincible root of your soul. Because the one who recognizes fear is no longer its slave. The one who chooses faith walks free, even if the ground shakes, even if the night is long, even if nothing is certain. Faith is not loud, but it is unbreakable. And once it becomes your reflection, you will discover the final victory. Fear may roar, but you will no longer tremble. You will stand, and you will live, and you will finally be free.